It began with a whisper in the corridor outside his chambers, hushed voices silenced by the scrape of a boot heel. Robert Baratheon had never been a man much inclined to subtlety or intrigue, yet even he knew there were secrets drifting like shadows in the Red Keep. He had always been too focused on the pleasures of life, hunting, feasting, and the embrace of women, to concern himself with the whisperings of courtiers. But that night, as he stood leaning heavily against a marble column in the darkness, he heard something he could not ignore. The Queen's name, uttered alongside the accusation of incest. He thought at first he must have misheard. Cersei's name twisted into that forbidden insinuation seemed unthinkable. He shook his head, the scent of wine heavy on his breath, trying to chase away the impossible. Incest. For a moment he was almost amused. He knew his wife despised him, knew she played her own games. But with her brother, the Kingslayer himself? Robert tried to recall all those times he had seen Jaime Lannister hovering too near, had witnessed Cersei's gaze lingering just a fraction longer on her twin than a sister's should. He had paid it no mind, too content in his ignorance, too distracted by his own pursuits. Yet now, with the seed planted, he could not deny that something might have always been off. He remembered finding them years ago when Bran Stark had fallen, their reactions far too tense, their posture too close. And he remembered the way Cersei's children bore none of his features. He had always told himself it was the luck of the draw, some quirk of their Lannister blood being stronger than his. But now, as suspicion crystallized into fact, he felt a mad anger building in his chest. Had he been a sober, careful man, he might have sought subtle confirmation. He might have sent for Varys to pluck the truth from the vines of rumor. Perhaps he would have confronted Ned Stark or even Littlefinger to glean their counsel. But subtlety was not Robert's way. Instead, the revelation stormed through him like a wild boar rushing at a red flag. There, deep in the silent halls of the keep, he swore to himself that he would find proof, and if he found proof, he would kill them both. The following day, Robert feigned a headache as he called for Cersei. He waited in his private solar, dismissing the guards so that when she came, they would be alone. He had placed a cup of sweet wine on a table near the window, angled just so that the midday light fell across her face. When she finally entered, clad in a gown of emerald green, he watched her closely. She curtsied, her expression schooled into calmness. He thought he could see it now, her eyes darting, her fingers twisting slightly in the folds of her dress. Was that guilt he sensed? Or just her usual distaste at being in his presence? "Wife," he said, voice low, "I have heard talk that troubles me." She tilted her head, but said nothing. "I would know the truth of our children's parentage." At those words, the color drained from her face. She opened her mouth, denied nothing, simply stood frozen in shock. That was answer enough. With a roar, Robert lurched from his seat. He grabbed Cersei by the arm, forcing her closer. He smelled her perfume, a delicate floral scent, and it sickened him now. "Is it true?" he demanded. "Are they his?" She tried to wrench free, but his grip was iron-hard. "Lie to me and I'll know," he warned. Cersei's eyes flashed. There was no longer any point in playing coy. She had never been meek, and in that moment, perhaps anger or pride spurred her tongue. "And what if they are?" she hissed. "What if you never were man enough to father a child of your own?" She spat the words like poison, her chin raised. That was all the confirmation he needed. A wave of fury so intense that Robert thought he might strike her down right there overcame him. He wanted to wrap his hands around her throat, to choke the life from that lying body, to punish her for making him a fool. But he did not kill her. Not yet. Instead, he threw her back, watching her stumble against the table. The goblet of wine spilled, crimson liquid spreading over polished wood, and he stared at it as though it were blood. He took a steadying breath, chest heaving, heart pounding. "You will remain in your chambers," he said at last, voice shaking with rage, "until I decide what to do with you." When she tried to speak again, he slammed his fist onto the table, making her flinch. "Leave!" he roared, and she fled, dress swirling behind her. Alone, Robert sank into the chair and buried his face in his hands. He had married her to unite kingdoms, to secure a lineage, to show the world that the dynasty he forged was strong. All of it was a sham. His claim to the throne, secured by the sword and the love of the people, now felt hollow. He had no true heirs, only bastards of Lannister twins. The very thought curdled his stomach. Now what? He could not simply ignore it. He would have to act, and the kingdom would tremble. He considered his options. He could name them all as traitors: Cersei, Jaime, and the children born of their sin. He could send Cersei to the Silent Sisters and Jaime to the block. But what of Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen? They were just children, yet their existence threatened the stability of his reign. How would the realm react if he exposed the truth? The Lannisters, with their gold and their influence, would not go quietly. Tywin would rise against him. War might come again. And Robert, despite everything, hated the thought of further bloodshed. He had grown weary of war's harsh toll. Yet could he stomach allowing this treachery to stand? He called for Ned Stark. If anyone could be trusted to advise him honestly, it was Ned. The man was already unsettled, having poked around at Jon Arryn's death, asking questions. Robert had resisted Ned's entreaties to look more closely before, preferring to remain in blissful ignorance. But now ignorance was impossible. As they sat in the dim light, Robert's voice cracked with anger as he told Ned everything. Ned's face grew grave, gray eyes darkening with sorrow and disappointment. He did not shout. He merely closed his eyes for a moment, as though in prayer before advising caution. Robert scoffed. Caution. He wanted blood, wanted justice, but Ned reminded him of the precarious situation they faced. If Robert acted rashly, the Lannisters would surely strike. A war would ignite that would tear the Seven Kingdoms apart. Ned pleaded for time and patience. Your Grace, we must be certain. We must have proof beyond your word and Cersei's heated admission. We must move in a way that secures the succession. You cannot simply announce this without a plan. Robert wanted to rage at Ned for his measured response, but he knew the man spoke truly. Proof was needed. Robert must steel himself and proceed with a clear head. For the next few days, Robert pretended ignorance. He went about his routine, though he drank less and watched more. He dispatched trusted men he believed would not be swayed by gold or influence, to quietly gather evidence. He had Varys under close scrutiny. Littlefinger offered his sly smiles, but Robert would not lean on him. The man played too many games. He relied on Ned Stark and Barristan Selmy, on those who held honor above all else. If he could confirm the children's parentage through the Old Hands papers, or by questioning Maester Pycelle, or by recalling something Jon Arryn had uncovered, then Robert could act. He would expose the Lannisters' treachery to the realm, show them that the Baratheon line had been insulted and betrayed. They would understand, he told himself. They would share his outrage. Yet as the days passed, tension gripped the Red Keep. Cersei remained locked in her chambers, guarded by 2 loyal men who reported her every request. Jaime's disappearance from court raised more questions. He seemed to have vanished, likely forewarned by Cersei. Rumors swirled. Even the servants sensed something was amiss. Robert forced himself to avoid the boar hunt he had been planning, fearing his absence might give them time to escape or to scheme. Instead, he stayed in King's Landing, prowling corridors, waiting for the moment to strike. The boar hunt could wait. There would be other hunts, he told himself. The prize he now sought was far more deadly than any wild beast lurking in the woods. So while evidence was quietly gathered, Robert made a decision behind closed doors with Ned Stark. He would not stand alone should the Lannisters choose treachery. He would ensure that when the truth emerged, he had the strength to crush any rebellion. Late one night, deep in the bowels of the Red Keep, Robert and Ned stood over a map of the 7 kingdoms lit by a single candle. The flickering flame painted grim shadows on their faces as Robert spoke of summoning loyal banners in secret. Messages would be dispatched by riders sworn to silence, summoning the lords who had remained true to House Baratheon and the old friendships forged in rebellion. Ned nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity of what this meant. The North could be mobilized, called to move quietly and gather near the Trident without raising suspicion. The Stormlands, too, held many who remembered Robert's victory and knew where their loyalty lay. They would not march in great numbers at once but would trickle in, disguised as traders or traveling parties visiting the capital for supposed festivities. In the corridors of power, information was currency, and silence was difficult to maintain. But Ned and Robert swore to keep this secret between as few men as possible. This would not be an open call to war. It would be a quiet readiness, a coiling of muscle before the strike. The ravens flew at dawn, carrying coded messages to lords who would know how to read them. The letters bore no direct incriminations, no explicit orders, merely subtle hints, reminders of oaths sworn and debts owed. Those who had fought alongside Robert during the rebellion would understand the urgency. The old bonds, though tested by time and peace, were not yet broken. Men would begin journeying south, their weapons hidden, their banners furled, awaiting only Robert's word. Should the Lannisters discover the plot, it would mean open confrontation, but Robert trusted that his sudden vigilance and stern command would keep the Red too tense and watchful for infiltration. With the North prepared to send men, Ned Stark used what quiet channels he could to ensure that loyal Northern bannermen began their march. The North was far away, but their strength could tilt the balance. If a tempest broke in King's Landing, Robert would not face the lion's den alone. As the days passed, more signs of caution appeared. The Kingsguard, save Jaime, were ordered to rotate in unusual patterns, ensuring at least one could be trusted not to have Lannister gold in his pocket. The city guard found new posts. Merchants who arrived claiming ties to certain lords were quietly brought to secure rooms under the keep, to wait and watch until the moment came. The tension in the air grew heavier, like the moments before thunder. Servants noticed that Lord Stark took fewer walks in the courtyard and instead stayed close by the king's side. They noted that Robert spoke in hushed tones and grew sober, that he drank less and ordered more guards for the royal apartments. And beneath it all was the feeling of looming disaster. Robert would not let this shame stand. He had been made a cuckold by Lannisters, his crown mocked. The blood of the dragon he had toppled long ago seemed less a memory and more a prelude, another chapter in the violent story of the Iron Throne. Now, as he prepared for the inevitable clash, he reminded himself of the cost. It would not be just blood spilled in secret. If the truth broke, the whole realm would know that the royal children were no heirs at all, that the queen had lain with her own brother. Fury and scandal would cut through the streets, and the Lannisters might choose to fight rather than bend. This time, Robert would be ready. He had gathered friends, swords in shadow, and the unshakable backbone of the North to stand with him. He had been set to go on a boar hunt, a time to enjoy his old pastime and escape the politics of the court. But he now refused to step away from King's Landing. He could not risk having his back turned at the crucial moment. Instead, he bided his time, waiting for a report that would confirm the final shred of evidence needed to expose the rotten heart of this royal family's secret. Every day he expected a whisper from one of his loyal men, one last piece of proof that would allow him to reveal the truth without fear of contradiction or denial. He knew that when that moment came, he would need to act decisively. The Lannisters would not go quietly into the night. Tywin Lannister was no fool. Once the truth was out, gold would buy swords and daggers in the dark. Jaime was a great warrior, and Cersei still had cunning. They would try to spirit the children away, form alliances, strike at the king's supporters. If Robert failed to be prepared, he could lose more than his throne. He could lose his life, and all 7 kingdoms might erupt in chaos. But with the banners he secretly summoned, the old friendships rekindled, Robert held a hidden hand of steel. When he moved, he would move with overwhelming force, a crushing blow so swift and brutal that no Lannister plot could withstand it. Ned Stark's presence reminded him that honor still had a place in these halls. The Northmen who answered the call would not do so lightly. They trusted Ned, and through Ned, trusted Robert. The king owed it to them to make this right not only through violence, but with a swift and just accounting of crimes. When the time came, the truth would not be whispered but announced clearly. supported by undeniable facts. That would rally others to the king's side, possibly even turn some Lannister allies away in disgust. It would make it easier to deal with the problem permanently. And after it was done, perhaps Robert could look upon the realm he had fought so hard to seize and see it cleansed of the poison that had infected his own household. For now, there was nothing more to do but wait for the right moment. The armies made their secret journeys, careful and slow, gathering near the capital like a silent storm front. The king's wrath was chained, but not for long, and Ned Stark stood by his side, grim and silent, a man prepared to do his duty no matter what bloody dawn awaited. Together, they would bring justice to King's Landing.